Okay, so I think our main topic for today was prompted by a incident in a writing prompt group that I'm in. Um, Basically, the prompt was west of the Rockies, and one of the participants wrote something and emailed it out. And this is one of these things where we have 30 minutes to write, and then we share it with people either via Zoom session or just by email. And in 30 minutes, she had written basically two or three verses of a song prompted by West of the Rockies, and then the first couple of pages of a concept. And when I read it, part of it might have been the prompt West of the Rockies kind of creates a visual in my head, but what she wrote was, to me, potentially the beginning of one of those kind of epic generation spanning tales of the West, like Wallace Stegner, if you've ever read Wally Stegner, or trying to think of who some of the other, I mean, some Steinbeck books are kind of like that. And so I mentioned that to her in an email response, and she said something along the lines of, "But how do you turn an idea into a story?" And so that's the topic for today. And I'll throw it out there for someone to volunteer on responding to that question. How do you turn your ideas into a story? Who wants to start?
I'll start. I'll go for it. So the short answer is usually I don't know. It's like I have an idea, it comes to me, and it's like it's an idea that carries a story with it. It's like, okay, I got it. And then it's just writing it down. The one exception to that, and I think I've talked about this before, is that when I was writing the book, The Directorate, I had an idea for a science fiction story involving a space elevator. I knew there was going to be something like that involved, and that it was going to have, space battles and this sort of thing. But I didn't really have a way to tie it all together until I had this character from another story I'd been working on, Teresa Gannon, and I thought, well, I'll just put her in that story. And when that happened, like somehow when I put those two elements together, then I got the story, and it all kind of came together pretty quickly after that. But that's the most intensive, where basically I just put two ideas together and got a story out of that. Otherwise, it's usually the idea is the story. So it's that's unfortunately not a very helpful answer to that question. It's like I just do, uh, but that's how it works for me.
My answer is going to be similar to yours, so hopefully Lucinda or Audrey have a different slash better answer.
I don't really. Go on.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
no,
Go
no,
ahead.
you go first. You go first.
With me, it's characters. When I wrote The Friendship of Mortals, it was, that was, of course, inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft story, Herbert West Reanimator. So already there was like a character there. And there was the narrator, who in the original story is nameless and kind of featureless. And then there was the setting, Miskatonic University. So I had those things to kind of, that was like the prompt. And then as soon as I had these characters and I kind of put them together, and I made the narrator a librarian instantly, because Miskatonic University library is a thing in those stories. And I was a librarian, even at the time I was still working. And of course, he had to be a cataloger, because that's what I was. So once I had these characters and the setting, scenes just started coming to mind. And that's how I proceeded. And as I wrote, I realized I was working toward an end, because I didn't follow the original story all really, really closely. And sort of an ending suggested itself to me. And so I was working toward that. But really, the nub of it for me is having characters that can do something. And then the scenes are me putting that into words as to what they do. So that's pretty well it.
I was going to say that I don't differentiate between ideas and stories. And if I go back in time to when I was writing radio scripts, we would sit down at a big board table, and they would come up with the various topics that I had to write about. Anything from drinking clean water to making sure food was fresh, etc. So I would have the actual, if you like, idea, like how to make a toothbrush out of a twig and why it's important to clean your teeth. Then I would make up a story and create characters that had a little drama around, doing it or not doing it. When I started writing books, I just had the story in my head, although that went horribly wrong very often. I would start off, and the characters, like Audrey, I think characters are very important, would get to about, I don't know, fifth way through, 20% way through, and say, heck, we don't think your idea is all that good after all. We're going to do our own thing. We've decided to do this, that, or the other. Yes, let's go to Venice, or let's take off, or let's fall out, or let's meet another love interest, whatever. And they seem to carry the whole thing along. And you're sort of left as a sort of finger on tapping on keys slave, just doing exactly as you're told by your characters who've now taken on a life of their own.
I know we've had this conversation before, but do any of you do any kind of outlining, any kind of thinking about and making notes about what the path is from the idea to the end of the story?
Kind of. I know what the end is, and it's a matter of getting from the beginning part. But then I would make up my sort of, I would just do the next scene. I didn't really have a grand plan in detail. I just kind of knew where I was heading, and I'd make up the next scene. And I remember writing notes like, well, what's he going to do now? He could get married. He could run away. He could go to jail. He could like stuff like that.
And then you roll a dice, and depending on what the number is, that which path you take, right?
Quite that random. I would just kind of look at the options and pick one I kind of liked and thought I could work with. But I sort of did it like that kind of scene by scene, just aiming toward the end I had fuzzily in mind.
What about you, Lucinda?
I have a separate Word document, which in the background, open at the same time. And as I do a chapter, I then go back to it and I add in all the people who are in it and describe them, green hair, blue eyes, whatever. And, moving from X to Y and where they all are. And then I write the next chapter or part, and then I add it in so that I can go back and make sure that he still has green hair, etc. If I'm writing something like a play, then I will actually draw out a plan, like especially if it's for stage, draw out a plan, and then I will put little cardboard, pictures of the characters and move them from room to room, because otherwise you've got to be very careful that you haven't ended up with or everybody on this side, and all of a sudden he enters from that side. And so, as I say, you can't do that for a book because it's far too long. So I do it basically as a directory of who is where and when and what they look like, and maybe basic characteristics like he doesn't like meat or she throws up at the sight of milk or whatever stuff thing I happen to include.
Okay. And Bertold, you don't, I think from prior conversations, you don't really outline, right?
Not generally, no. Although the latest thing I'm working on now, I have a kind of sort of outline. This is the one I was talking about, and I think the last chat where I'm writing it backwards. And for that, I'm getting lost.
You need a roadmap for that.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned there's a story that I want to write backwards too, and it's just part of the problem is trying to figure out how to do that on the fly, which is how I normally write. How to go backwards, so anyway, so my answer to this question is a lot like Bertold's, because most of my stories, I would say, come from a prompt that I find somewhere. Some of them are ideas like the Killing Bertold Gambrell. That was just an idea that I thought it would be interesting to try to write a story about this writer leading a workshop, and somehow he dies, and the narrator is held responsible for his death. But I was thinking, the novella I published a few years ago, The Irreparable Past, was basically prompted by a guy writing, basically what he said on this writing website in response to a question was, sitting on the porch of his house, looking out over the bay and watching a great heron feed in the shallows. And it just created this image in my head of an older man living alone on some bay, and the great heron is his constant companion. And that became The Irreparable Past. I had absolutely no idea about any aspect of the story when I started, other than this guy living alone. And basically the story became how he came to this place where he was living by himself, and he liked it. And, you know, the great heron, which turned into an egret in my story, was like his only friend. And then it's just kind of a exploration of how to get from that idea to a story. And I think that describes most of what I write. I never outline. I just go from scene to scene. I almost never skip around and write some later scene before I get to it. But, you know, I come up with an idea and then I just start writing and see what happens. And sometimes that creates huge problems, because the thing that I'm working on right now, which is The Jump, which Berthold has eagerly been awaiting for a few years now. I'm stuck on where I am and how to get from where I am to the end. And I know what the ending is, although I realized I could make the ending even more interesting with adding a whole new element to it. So the ending is getting more complicated, but I have no idea how to get to where I am, which is basically about a third or halfway through, to get to that ending. I don't know whether I want to just keep going. There's two different people going on a cross-country trip for certain reasons, and I don't know if I want to continue on a almost like, you know, county by county description of their journey, or if I want to skip ahead to where the conclusion is. And so I just sit here and don't write much right now because I don't know what to do.
The last book I published, I really stuffed up on big time. It was based on something I heard years ago that actually happened, and I thought, wow, that is quite an interesting thing. One guy, one girl, they both win the lottery, £150 million, even more Canadian dollars, in fact, American dollars than that. And in each case, the guy is sensible and tries to do good with it. And then on the other hand, he goes nuts and goes into drugs and all the rest of it. And the girl does exactly the same. Sent it to the beta readers, and they said, what the hell is going on? We haven't a clue. Who's who? What are they doing? Where are they? Why is he nice now and he's not nice then? And I'm thinking, I've made this too complicated. It was totally clear in my head, but not for the reader. So then I took him out and I just gave his scenes to her, so that she did all the good things and all the bad things. And then I managed to I won't tell you the end because it's really very exciting at the end. Just in case somebody sees this, I don't want to give the ending away. But I had to simplify it right down because I had got so complicated that although I knew where I was going, nobody else did. So it would have been a total waste of time. Oh, thank heavens for beta readers.
Yeah. Audrey, do you ever get stuck on what the next scene is?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I think I just make myself keep going. And then, of course, I do a lot of stuff after the first draft. And sometimes some scenes just get thrown out or changed or even moved around, like the order of scenes will change because things look different when you're just making the thing up versus when you're working with something that's already there. So I don't remember ever getting so stuck that I actually abandoned writing that particular book. But I tend to be pretty methodical and plodding about my stuff. Like I usually know where I'm going and what steps need to be taken or about how many before I get there. So it's just a matter of kind of refining the thing. But that business about being too, I always feel that my stories are too simple somehow when I'm writing. And now my beta readers for the last one didn't seem to agree with that. So that was kind of reassuring because, nobody said, oh, this is too simple. I could tell where you were going right from the, beginning and all that. But I think that's just one of those psychological things that it's going to be too short. It's going to be too simple. Yeah. It's kind of dumb. That, you have to kind of say, shut up already and just keep writing.
I have that issue too, and thinking that the story is too simple, and also once, like with the thing I'm working on now, once I finally figure out how to get from here to there, then my next challenge will be, well, if I figured it out, the reader's going to figure it out. So there's no surprise. And that's an issue I have to always work through. Once I figure out the rest of the roadmap, then it becomes a question of, can I get through that? Because like I said, once I figure that out, I just figure, oh, the reader's going to know what's going to happen. Because if I figured it out, so why bother? So anyway.
But like a lot of readers, I think when you get to about the 50,000 mark, 45,000 word mark, then things seem to sag in the middle. You know what the ending's going to be. And very often you're thinking, well, I've thought in the past, I've got to weave a subplot into this. And the thing then is you've got to have the subplot that actually comes together with the main plot and the characters for it to make sense at the end. Yeah. So I very rarely have, I've normally sorted that out in my head before I sit down to write, although I still get that sort of, where do I take them now sometimes? But at least, I don't know, a lot of other writers say that, by the time you get to that stage, you're beginning to think, well, I've labored this. I can't jump to the end too soon because it's not a full book. So yeah, that subplot can take a bit of weaving in.
Audrey, I had a question actually for you on the topic of turning ideas into stories. I seem to remember that for the ice cream truck from hell, that was just inspired by hearing a tune. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Oh no, it was an actual ice cream truck.
It was an ice cream.
Yeah, I heard, how they have that very characteristic tune they play that's kind of very sort of tinny and stuff. Well, this was a Brahms lullaby played really fast and sort of mechanical sounding. It was an ice cream truck, but it was in October, sort of late in the day in October. And this summer, we've had ice cream trucks cruising by here all the time. Well, one anyway. And so that made perfect sense. But I didn't remember there being a lot of ice cream truck action that particular summer. And this was in the fall. And here it was tootling along. And it wasn't just going from point A to point B because it had its music going and stuff. And I thought, that is so weird. Maybe it's the ice cream truck from hell. Oh. And so I built the story up around that. Yeah, that was purely an idea.
I love things like that, though, where, and Mark, I know you do this too, where you can just take just some small thing and weave a whole story out of it.
So my example of that is years ago, I was talking to a coworker on the phone and she was at home and she must have had hardwood floors or something because she was walking in her kitchen and I could hear her heels on the flooring surface. And that became a short story. Just that sound prompted an idea for a short story.
Yeah, I love that. I hope. But I hope someday I get something like that.
That's the thing for me is I'm my idea factory is kind of out of practice these days. But you read the collection of short stories. One of them is based on a dead body being found outside of my office one morning when everybody got to work. There's all sorts of different ways. You go to a restaurant and you hear some conversation and there's some line that you hear that could become an idea for a story. Or the one that I mentioned about the irreparable past, just somebody talking about sitting on his porch and watching the bay and the great heron feeding in the shallows. And that's how I come up with almost all my ideas. Then it's just a question of turning it into a story.
And
Were
I
you
think
gonna
a
say
short
something?
story could work much better from an idea like that than maybe a whole
Yeah.
novel, unless it
Yeah.
sort of takes on a life of its own, and you really get to know the characters and they seem more complex than you expected, and you can do more with them. But if it's like that ice cream truck story, I mean, I don't know, for some reason it seemed sort of 1960s or 50s to me, so I kind of created that scenario of that type of family and the kid, and then there was the sort of kid from the bad side of town who was obviously neglected, and the two of them became friends at school, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I was sort of thinking Stephen King-ish ideas with that, because you know how he
Yeah.
often has that kind of kid scenario in his stories.
It's interesting.
Well-
It always makes me think of Bradbury whenever I read it.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, I think he was in the back of my mind as well. Yeah, what's his story that involves the one about the circus coming to town?
Something wicked this way comes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes I start with an idea and I think it's only going to be a 1,500 or 2,000 word short story, and then it just keeps going. So The Dime is a good example of that.
Mhm.
I had a prompt, I wrote something that was basically 2 short chapters long, maybe a couple thousand words, and I thought that was it. It's actually what I took to that Mendocino Coast Writers Conference, and based on the feedback I got there, I decided to keep going with it and wrote a novella. And then my son read the novella and said it's not over, and that's what prompted me to keep writing. So I wrote a full novel based on that, and I could write another probably 2 novels with those characters at least if I wanted to. I just don't know if I want to. So sometimes my ideas start small and they just keep going and going and going. So
Coming back to
It-
what Audrey said, that it's the characters that move.
Mhm.
yeah,
You know, whatever situation they happen to be in, it's the characters that actually I think the reader connects with, and they either love them, loathe them, rooting for them, waiting for them to be, you know, burnt at the stake or whatever. And it's the characters that is, I think, even more important than the story sometimes.
yeah. Yep. Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
If I follow on from that, something I mentioned in one of the emails during the month is that something I was taught early on is that when you do have a character, then you need to think, well, they advised, think back to when they were children, in other words, make up a backstory for them, even if it's never mentioned in the book. It gives them motivation. You can always mention a particular something that happened in their early lives, but to have a real character that lives and breathes and you feel for, they need to have had parents or no parents, or you some kind of background so that you know where they're coming from, why they're thinking, why they act the way they do. And I thought that was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had.
One of the things that I experienced in this writing group, and I know I've mentioned it before with Zoe Keithley, is she would run us through these exercises where we would visually set up a scene. Just pick a location, whether it's real or fake, and then you start populating it with people and objects and smells and sounds, and put things that you expect to be there. And then she would always, okay, now what's something in that scene that would be unexpected? And it really helps you flesh out what something might look like and how to describe it as you're going through a scene. So at the end of the detail about this story that this fellow writer sent is that she and I are going to try to co-write it. So we'll see what happens.
That's really cool. That'll be neat.
Well, we'll see. I sent her something with a few more pages added on that kind of carried on the scene that she started it with, and then I skipped ahead to try to give a little bit of a backstory to one of the characters, and we're going to keep seeing how it goes.
But that kind of thing, it might be, well, this might be too obvious, but to have like 2 points of view and each of you writes one of them. You know, like two main characters, and
Yep.
and you kind of, you know how a lot of books flop back and forth between this person and that person. Whether it's written in first person or third doesn't really matter, but that way you won't. It might not be as messy, but it'll be interesting. I'm sure you think of it as an experiment, right?
It's
Sort
an experiment. At
Yeah.
some point, probably next month, we're going to get together and try to talk through how we're going to approach this, and that might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Didn't you
Okay.
and Trent Lewin do something like that once? or-
It was a short story. It was we talked about doing writing something where we would alternate chapters, and so I thought he was going to write a chapter, then I would write a chapter, and instead what he did was he sent me chapters 1, 3, and 5
Oh,
already
cool.
done, and then I had to plug in chapters 2, 4, and 6.
Cool.
And it's actually it's on my blog. I think I put it on my podcast, I think, but it's actually to me it's a really interesting story, and it's interesting because he and I think have just dramatically different writing styles.
What's it called?
Oh, I need to find it. I forget what the name of it is.
Okay, well, if it's on your blog, I'm sure I can find it.
Yeah,
somewhere.
I'll email you the name or a link from my blog.
Okay.
Okay. So any other specific writing topics any of you want to address, or do we want to get to the second part of this that I mentioned?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's go.
Go for it.
So, since you're on my screen, Audrey, you're first. If you could only read one book for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh,
And by the way, if you have questions for me or want me to answer any of the questions that I ask you, feel free to turn them around on me when you're done.
Oh, okay. Gee, one book for the rest of my life. I don't, offhand, I'd probably pick The Lord of the Rings, but that's just because that's a book I've reread quite a few times. But I'm thinking the rest of my life, man, that's a long time. Well, I don't know how long it'll be, but we don't want anything too complicated in case I get softening of the brain. It'd probably be one of those big Russian novels. If I could.
That's not too complicated.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, you do a little bit at a time. Right now, I'm reading that Hilary Mantel book about the French Revolution, Place of Greater Safety. And that I wouldn't want that for the rest of my life, but it's long books you can kind of nibble away at. So I might do like, I'm not that fond of War and Peace, but I do like Anna Karenina. So I might go with that, Tolstoy's book. If I could find a more up-to-date translation, or, well, no, never in the original Russian. I can read Russian just a tiny bit, but not for a huge book like that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Bertold, your question. If you could only read one author for the rest of your life, who would that author be?
Oh, wow.
And listeners and viewers, as you can tell, they didn't get these questions ahead of time.
I'm going to have to go with P.G. Wodehouse. Because
I knew you would.
Somebody said once that it's impossible to be unhappy while reading Wodehouse, and that's true. You just can't. So if I'm gonna just stick with one author, I have to pick somebody who I know I'm going to enjoy.
Okay.
That's a really hard question, though. Wow. Especially since P.G. Wodehouse is dead and won't be producing anything new.
Yeah.
It does make it
I thought about this, and to be honest, the only author I could really come up with, and I'm going to hate this, and it's going to surprise, I think, at least one or two of you, but I would say Stephen King.
No.
Just because of the sheer volume of his work. And I could ignore some of the crap and focus on the better stuff. But it's just like, okay, if I can only read one author for the rest of my life, it'll take me 5 years just to get through his entire collection once. So
yeah, I could see that. I could, yeah, because I read quite a few. Some of his books I really don't like at all, and some of them I find really interesting. So yeah, I could go with that.
I was thinking of Wally Lamb, but he's only written 4 or 5 books. So at some point I'd get tired of that. So Stephen King, just based on production. Okay, Lucinda, if you could only read one genre for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I think it would have to be historical novels because not only are they a learning curve, because I really, I love history. It was my main subject. So yes, it would be historical novels. I'm a great fan of Jean Plaidy. I know she's very old-fashioned nowadays, but she does take you into a character, whether it's, I don't know, Lady Jane Grey or Richard I or whatever, whoever it happens to be. And yeah, I think I'd have to go with that.
Okay, good. Okay, Audrey,
Mhm.
have you ever broken a bone? And if so, what bone and how did you break it?
Oh, okay. Yes, this is a good one. Now, I broke a little toe bone, and the occasion on which I broke it was on my wedding day, between the ceremony and going away on the honeymoon. Now, our honeymoon was going from Vancouver Island to Saskatoon, where we were going to be living, and we did live there for 12 years, and we did it by train. So I had this little broken bone, and I think what I did was I didn't realize it was broken. I just crumped my foot because, excitement, maybe drinking a bit, running up these stairs to get into my going away outfit, and I crumped something. So I just spent the time on the train with an ice pack. And then when we got to Saskatoon, we went to the hospital and I got a cast, and that was miserable because I was just this little tiny bone. What the heck? But the cast hung around. I managed to wreck the first cast because I was hard on it, and then they replaced it. So I had to do the full whatever it was number of weeks. But I've never broken an important bone. Let's put it that.
I have never broken a bone, and I'm absolutely terrified of the idea.
Well, as you get older, it's more serious.
But I just can't imagine what that must feel like. Have either of the, Lucinda or Berthold, have either of you broken a bone?
I kicked out in fun in a swimming pool once and crushed my little toe against the wall of the
Broken
pool.
toe, yeah.
But they didn't give me a cast. They just told me to bandage it up next to the next toe and hobble around for a few weeks, and I couldn't. But because I'm getting on a bit, well, a lot, an awful lot. I'm like a geriatric now. I look for handrails. If necessary, I will go down one step, bring the next step. I don't care if I look totally ridiculous, because half the people I know are in hospital with broken hips, broken legs, broken whatever. And like you, I'm terrified of really breaking a real bone somewhere painful.
Yeah.
I don't like pain.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah. Berthold, have you ever broken a bone?
No, I have not.
Okay, so we're all relatively free of broken bones. Knocking on wood for all of us.
So far.
Okay. Yes. Next question. I will go to Berthold again. Have you ever been arrested?
I have not.
Okay.
Darn.
Boring.
I was thinking when I came up with these questions, I was thinking, you know what? That's when I want to ask Richard. I'm willing to bet he's the only one in this group that might say yes. Okay. Lucinda, I think this is a good question for you. The favorite place you've ever traveled to, and I mean traveled, not lived, but somewhere you've traveled to. What's your favorite place?
I think it, and my memory is gone AWOL. I mean, it's off with the fairies, but I'm just trying to remember the name of the town in Laos where I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was still dark, and I went outside the hotel and stood in the street to watch the monks come down to receive the food in the morning from the people living there. And it was just an incredibly spiritual, experience. And I must admit to being basically atheist these days. And it really got to me. and I think that was just incredible. So possibly Laos, that, yeah, although Venice would come a close second, although it's full of tourists a lot of the time, because it's just an amazing place to visit.
yeah.
Seeing people living basically in the water was amazing. But yeah, I think I'd have to add that.
Audrey or Bertold, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Well, I don't travel that much. The most exotic places I've been to are Lithuania, because my family comes from there. So my mom and I went there. She pretty well bullied me into going in 1998. I didn't want to go, but that was an interesting experience, because we stayed with, relatives and stuff, not in hotels, and it was just totally interesting, because I'd never been to Europe before, and this is a place in Europe with those old kind of cities that you see pictures of and stuff. And yet it's totally unusual, because it's not on the big tourist route, although I gather it was becoming popular with people who flew Ryanair from Britain to have bachelor parties and stuff. I don't know, weird, eh? But I didn't see any evidence of that. So that was interesting. Now, in terms of just a place I like to go to myself, I would vote for Tofino, British Columbia, which isn't that far away from here, maybe a half a day's drive, but it's on the very west coast of Vancouver Island. And it's become quite developed in the last decade or so, but it's still, you can have that feeling of being totally away from everything, even though you're not that far away. So I do like that.
Good. Bertold?
I would have to say Niagara Falls.
Right.
That's beautiful. And there's actually, if I may, there's a story that relates back to the directorate, based on my travel to Niagara Falls, which is at Niagara Falls. Have any of you been there?
Yeah.
I haven't, but I keep
Yes.
seeing pictures of it, and I need to go.
So there are casinos, and it seems like they're always building more and more casinos there. And one time, we went into one of these casinos just to get something to eat, and I see all these people lined up at the slot machines, and I remember thinking, it's odd to be at Niagara Falls, this beautiful place, and you're indoors at a slot machine.
Yeah.
So in the directorate, there's a bit where they're on Mars and they go to a casino, because I thought, we'll know that we've really conquered Mars when people are so used to it that they build a casino on it.
That was quite a tough question for me, because I've lived in 9 different countries.
Yeah, I know. That's
And
why
I actually totaled up. If I can't get sleep at night, I start trying to count all the countries I've visited, and I think it's something like 52.
Wow.
That's not including airport layovers. I mean,
Yeah,
I've been to
yeah.
Dubai several times, but I've never been out of the airport, so I can't count that. So it's really quite hard, because going back on it, I loved Singapore. I thought Singapore was fabulous, but not the same feeling that I had in Laos that particular morning. That was really stuck in my mind. Yeah.
I see, when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking place. What's a place that you visited? And your answer prompted me to remember my, I think, most favorite travel experience was we went to Europe for the first time back in December of 2018. So we were in Berlin, Prague, and Vienna in the darkest, coldest part of the winter. And when we got to Prague, I woke up the first morning and I was sick, and I ended up sick the rest of the trip and basically did hardly anything in Prague and Vienna. But when everybody else in our group left, I stayed back and was going to try to get some sleep. I couldn't sleep because it started to snow. And it was the only day it snowed the entire time we were there. And I just decided, I don't care how bad I feel, I need to see Prague in the snow. And so I walked around for a couple of hours by myself, walking through the old town part and walking across the Charles Bridge while it snowed. And that was like the ultimate travel experience I've had, just walking in the snow in Prague. So, okay. Lucinda, I'll ask you first on the next one too. The least favorite place you've ever traveled to?
Oh goodness. oh dear, this is quite. Could I mention the meat market in Benghazi?
Sure.
When I first arrived there, I basically didn't know where to go shopping. And so I went to the meat market, and it was just absolutely gross. And that was just awful. I mean, Benghazi itself wasn't exactly fantastic at the best of times. And all the meat was lying on the concrete floor. And it was just all, as I say, really, really gross. And it was such a culture shock because that was the first time I'd been to a couple of other countries before, but that was the biggest culture shock to me, that it's something so very different that people would pick up a piece of meat off a concrete floor, and sling it in a bit of paper and pay money for it. And camels' heads just sort of sticking there, and all the rest of it. The only upside of it is that on the way out, we saw a man selling rabbits, and they were really cute. They were bad.
Yeah, but they weren't as pets.
Well, that's what I thought, you see. But my daughter at the time was in the pushchair, and she went, well, just block it out if you've got sensitive ears. But she said, bugger, I want one, because she couldn't say buddy. So I said, well, really, we lived in a flat, but she just went ballistic about this. So I said to him, okay, I'll have that one. So he picked it up by the ears, and he got the I found. I said, no, don't do that. So he put it in a plastic bag, and we took it home, and it was an excellent pet. It really was. So it didn't realize it sort of escaped death by seconds, but and she loved it, and he was a great companion for her. So it worked out okay. Later, I did find a shop that did sell proper meat, that did actually have covers over the top and a glass counter, and that was just amazing. But to start with, I was really, the first few months, I don't know how we survived, to be quite honest. That we didn't go down with drastic food poisoning.
Yeah,
but we survived.
Okay. Any other responses to that question?
Not too interesting ones, no. I just don't like anywhere that's too hot. So that's about it. And
well, my least favorite place is Cabo San Lucas, and part of the reason why I hated it was we went there right before hurricane season started.
Wow.
So it was extremely hot and extremely humid, and other reasons I didn't like it. So don't go to Cabo San Lucas in June or July.
Okay.
Whereabouts is that?
It's down at the tip of Baja in Mexico.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Most of the places I've been to that were hot and humid were to do with conferences when I was working. Yeah. The American Library Association's main conference was always in, I think, June or July. And so we'd go to places like Chicago. Well, Chicago wasn't too bad. And I've been to Ottawa, Ontario, and Hamilton, Ontario in the summer for Canadian library conferences, and that was really hot and humid. One place I really liked, though, was San Francisco in that time of year, because it was, the temperate climate.
In June and July, San Francisco's always foggy and cold.
Yeah, and I think this was in the 80s, and it was when gay pride parades were still, well, they weren't happening just everywhere, but of course San Francisco had one. Yeah. So I went and watched that, and that was quite interesting.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can wrap this up in our Getting to Know Us segment. Have you ever gone to a movie at a movie theater and fallen asleep during the movie?
No.
Lucinda? Bertil? Go ahead.
I have not.
You have not? Lucinda?
Unfortunately, yes, and I embarrass my children beyond measure because I snore quite loudly, I've been told. And they wanted to go and see a movie with, I think it was called The Green Mask, with Jim Carrey in it.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies to him, but I was very tired. I'd been working long hours, and after about 10 minutes, I was out for the count. And they didn't know whether to try and wake me and shut me up, because to stop me snoring, or pretend they had no clue who the woman was sitting next to them. They spend more of the movie worrying about that than actually watching the screen, I think. So yes, I have.
I know you have a story about this, Mark.
Yeah, well, I fell asleep about 30 or 40 minutes into Star Wars Episode 3 because we had told the kids we were going to take them to see it that weekend, and I spent the morning doing yard work, and then I had lunch, and then I was sitting there around 2 o'clock drinking a beer, and suddenly it occurred to me, oh, we promised them we'd take them to this movie. So we took them to the movie after I'd had that long day of yard work, and then plus the beer didn't help. And then just sitting there watching what I believe to be is one of the most horribly acted, scripted movies in the history of movies. and I just, there was this point at which there was dialogue between Natalie Portman's character, whose name I'm forgetting.
I know this. I know the scene you mean. I know.
And it was just like, oh my God, I can't take this. I'm tired. I think I'll take a nap now.
So that movie when I was a teenager, that was basically my favorite movie.
Yeah.
So my parents had seen it many times, and I told them this story, and they were like, "Your friend is a smart man."
It is the only time I've ever fallen asleep in a movie theater. It probably will be the only time, but I just, like I said, it was just like, I just can't take this. That was such, it's like the scene where they're in her bedroom or something like that. Yeah. And the fact that you know what scene I'm talking about means my perspective is accurate.
It's not even a fan of the movie would not call that a highlight.
I'm really impressed with both of you because I don't understand those movies. They're totally beyond me. They go off in some realm of fantasy, and I haven't a clue what's going on and who's who in the zoo and what they're doing and why. So I've tended not to watch them all the way through. Perhaps that's why I don't understand them. I don't know. But there was one James Bond movie that had about six lines of dialogue all the way through. I can't remember which one, but three before. I was this ridiculous.
I've only seen 2 Star Wars movies, and the first one, and then maybe whichever was the second one, and that was it. I don't watch a lot of movies, I have to admit. We used to go to movies at the university. You know how university campuses always have a theater. Yeah. They show things that are that have been around for a bit, and sometimes they have sort of festivals of some kind of old movies. So we'd always go to those. So, but even that, I mean, we don't do anymore. I think the last movie I saw had to be that Annihilation. You know, that kind of weirdo movie about those women wandering through a swamp and all kinds of strange things happen. And it's quite bizarre. It's based on a book, of course. But that was the last one I saw. So
I've seen all of the 9 Star Wars movies, and the reality for me is the entire series is horribly acted and scripted, and it's just simple entertainment, escaping reality for a little bit. But yes, it obviously means much more to a lot of other people.
Can you all help me out a bit? Because I think there's something a bit wrong with me. I only watch a movie once. I only read a book once, unless it's very, very special and it's about 30 years since I last read it and I can't remember a thing about it. Once I know what the end is going to be, then I'm not interested in plowing through it a second time. Now, aren't I a bit odd? I mean, people actually talk about movies they've seen, and they've seen them several times, and they can repeat the dialogue, and they say, oh, I've seen The Sound of Music 500 times, you know, and I'm thinking, why? So are you the same? Do you also do that?
No, I for the most part see a movie once. There are a few exceptions. For instance, I would still watch this movie, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I watched that repetitively at times. And, part of it also is with kids. Kids like to see movies over and over again. So we've seen a lot of movies a number of times because of our kids. There's a baseball movie called The Sandlot that we watched a number of times, and I would sit down and watch it again, even though I know it. But for the most part, I'm like you. I don't reread books anymore, except those that are special to me, and I don't rewatch movies. One other response to that is when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, I went to see it with a friend, and then it so totally blew me away. My sister went to see it the next day, and I went back to see it again with her because it was just, I was at, probably 17 or years old at the time, and it just, the movie was absolutely incredible to me. So I went to see it again, and I think I saw it 4 times in the movie theater before it stopped running. I've never seen a movie twice in a movie theater other than that one.
I've never rewatched movies, but I do. I used to reread books all the time. I mean, it was just kind of like, sort of like you get a favorite food and you just want to have more, like maybe not all in one sitting, but you think, yeah, I could really, I'd really like to experience that again, the book. So I'd reread books. But now there's so many books around that I just don't have time to reread too many. So yeah, it's pretty selective. Yeah. But movies, no.
I reread and I rewatch constantly. So I'm sort of the odd one in this group.
Okay. Is that anything else, anybody? What did you say, Berto?
Oh, I was just asking if that's it for the questions.
I think that's it. I had a few more, but I know that you need to get going.
We'll do them. That was fun. We'll do another round of those.
Well, I think someone else should come up with the next round of questions.
Okay.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's it. If you have any ideas out there on how to turn an idea into a story when this posts, feel free to throw it in the comments. Thank you guys. Have a good rest of your weekend.